dished it up in a bag for me. Well, that's like incubating that, that's nasty. So, that's how, type of foodborne transmission. So most foodborne pathogens produce GI signs and symptoms, diarrhea, nausea, throwing up. So foodborne diseases are food poisoning and tapeworm infestation. So, oh, another vehicle transmission is a vector. Vectors are animals that carry pathogens from one host to another, and we already said arthropods are the main ones that we deal with. Mechanical transmission. Who does the mechanical transmission?
Flies.
Flies. Yeah, they carry pathogens passively, on their bodies, on their feet and their bodies, to the food. And they can carry typhoid fever, the bacteria that cause typhoid fever, bacillary dysentery, which is another bacteria. They can take it from infected feces to your food. You know, the flies love the feces, but they also like potato salad. So, or anything, you know. They'll land on anything. That's mechanical transmission. And the other one we talked about was biological transmission, also an arthropod. Passes the pathogen in a bite or feces, which then enters the wound where it bit you, and the pathogen can get in that way. And the pathogen completes part of its life cycle in the vector, so it's inside the vector, in the gut or saliva. So the vector, if it bites somebody that has this pathogen and gets infected blood, then those pathogens will reproduce in the vector's gut, and then it comes out either in the feces, or in the case of malaria, the mosquito, it left the gut and went up to the salivary glands. And so when the mosquito bites you, it's injecting the pathogen. So here's showing you the mechanical vector is the fly.
It's a mosquito.
Yeah, they already said that. It lands on feces and then goes through a food or a drinking glass. They also like drinking glasses. Biological ones is internal, the pathogen's internal. The mechanical, it's external. It says on the fly. And example they're giving is Anopheles mosquito carries malaria protozoa in its gut, that it goes through a certain cycle of its life in the gut and then travels to the salivary glands, and it goes to you after you get bit. Nosocomial infections, they're now calling those healthcare associated infections. These are infections that are acquired by patients or the hospital staff, and it can be in a hospital or a hospital-like facility, like a surgery center or the places that they recuperate in, especially old people. What are those called?
Skilled nursing facility.
Yeah, like a nursing facility, but
Okay.
anything that is, anything like that, where these diseases get spread. And so these nosocomial infections account for 2 million infections a year and 20,000 deaths a year in the United States. It's the 8th leading cause of death in the United States of these nosocomial infections. And both my brother-in-laws have been in the hospital, and they have come down with lots of infections from the hospital. One of them's in and out all the time, and he gets fungal infections, bacterial infections, this all coming from the hospital while he's being treated for whatever he went in there for. Surgery and catheterization increases risk of infection by introducing normal microbiota into the body where it doesn't belong. It's going in a different route. And problem because we're seeing more and more resistant strains of pathogens to antibiotics. Conditions that compromise the host would be broken skin or mucous membrane. So if you go to the hospital with trauma or you're having surgery, or you have a suppressed immune system, you have some sort of condition that your immune system is suppressed. Transmission of nosocomial infections can be direct contact from staff to patient or patient to patient, or it can be indirect through fomites, such as catheter or the hospital ventilation system, where it becomes airborne, or the water cooling towers of the air conditioning system. Emerging infectious diseases are ones that are new or changing and show an increase in incidence or potential for increase in the near future. So some emerging diseases are West Nile virus. That one we never even used to have it here, but it's increasing, and every year on the news you will hear in the summertime of people in this state that die. Every year somebody dies from West Nile virus. SARS, whooping cough, California, every once in a while have epidemics of whooping cough. Factors that contribute to these emerging diseases, you can get, genetic, where they've shared different genetics, and they get a new strains that are more virulent. You can get new serovars, such as for Vibrio cholera, that O139 is the serovar. The use of antibiotics or pesticides encourages the growth of pathogens, and global warming and weather changes increase the distribution and survival of reservoirs and vectors, and diseases spread to new geographic locations with the invention of the airplane. It used to be if it took you a month to get someplace, you either got well or you died en route. So now we can have somebody that's sick with something. Tuberculosis is one of them. They get on knowingly that they have tuberculosis and get on an airplane where they're breathing and it's going through the air, they recirculate a certain percentage of that air that's in the cabin. Epidemiology, that is a scientific study of the source and transmission of a disease within a population. Modern epidemiology began in the mid-1800s, and there's three people that they cite that had an effect, and we're using techniques to try to figure out why, what the source of things and how they got spread were. One was that Ignaz Semmelweis. That was the one that he ran a hospital, and he had midwives running one birthing room and med students running another one. And his mortality rate in the med student birthing room was around 18%. And he saw that none of the rich people would go to his hospital to have babies, and the poor people didn't go to the hospital to have babies. And he decided to see what was going on. And his med students had the practice of, in the morning, doing autopsies. Well, you do an autopsy on somebody that had died from some bacterial infection or something. They didn't wear gloves. They didn't wash their hands. And they would leave the autopsy room and then go into the birthing room where they were doing the birth. But he started looking around and seeing what happened, and then he decided that, because that was different from the nurses' room that they were running. They weren't putting their hands on cadavers. So he initiated the doctors to start washing their hands with this chloride of lime, and that dropped his rates then down to less than 2%. So he was one. Another one was Florence Nightingale. She recorded statistics on epidemic typhus in the military and in the civilian million populations, and she was comparing the rates and, you know, when you're doing epidemiology, you're gathering information, a lot of information. And she used statistical comparisons to demonstrate that disease, poor food, and unsanitary conditions were killing British soldiers. And so she published this 1,000-page report on it, and the Army, based on her report, the Army started making reforms based on the work that she did. So she was another one, and then this one's a real good one. The British epidemiologist John Snow, he was investigating a cholera outbreak in London. And so he decided to keep track of where everybody got their water from, where they lived, all this kind of stuff. And he put up one of those maps that you see on CSI where they're putting pins in where all the murders are. And he started putting up a pin every place, every time that somebody came down with cholera, and he found out where they got their water from. And he noticed that most of the people were using the Broad Street pump for their water. That time you'd go to a central area and you didn't have running water in your house, and you'd pump the water that you were going to use and take it home. So he took the handle off the pump, and nobody could get the water, and that ended the cholera epidemic. So there's different types of epidemiology. One is called descriptive epidemiology. It's collecting all the data that describes the occurrence of the disease. So they collected information on the individuals that came down with it, such as where were they, the time, their age, were they males or females, their race, were they married, their occupation, all that kind of stuff. So Snow's approach was descriptive, and this approach is looking backwards. You have an epidemic, it's already happened, now you're looking to see what do all these people that have this epidemic have in common that you can glean information with to see what might be the problem. Analytical epidemiology, that analyzes a specific disease to determine the cause. And there's two different methods for this. One is the case control method. You look for a common factor among the affected people that might have preceded the disease. The second is the cohort method. You can study two groups, one that had contact with the pathogen and one that didn't. So, say you are looking, you're you'll look at two groups of people, one that received blood transfusions and maybe one that didn't. And then you can look to see if there is a relationship then from a bunch of people that came down with hepatitis B, and did they get a blood transfusion or not. So that is where they study two groups of cohort method. And experimental epidemiology tests a hypothesis. Usually that's used for the effectiveness of a drug. So you also have two groups. You'll have one that will receive the drug and one that receives a placebo. And then you're going to compare the groups of infected people to determine if those that received the drug recovered any faster than those that didn't. And then they can evaluate whether the drug is effective or not. And when they do these studies, it's usually a double blind. The patient doesn't know if he's getting or she's getting the drug or a placebo, and the doctor doesn't know either. Center for the Disease Control and Prevention, that's the CDC. It's a branch of the U.S. Public Health Service in Atlanta, Georgia. And it is the central source of all this epidemiological information in the U.S. And you heard about it a lot when we had those Ebola cases going on. The CDC issues the morbidity and mortality